Hello, this is Bill Levinson, and thank you for listening. I'm here to talk about climate change, scam of the century. This is part 2 of a two-part series. The first part of this presentation showed how carbon taxes or cap-and-trade mandates will not even get rid of carbon dioxide. They'll simply move the high-wage jobs along with all their carbon dioxide offshore to places like China. The first part also showed that the behavior of many climate activists shows that perhaps they don't even believe in their own agenda. When people aren't watching what they're doing, they fly private planes to Copenhagen for the climate conference, which of course creates far more than their fair share of carbon emissions. We even have to question whether the United Nations, which is not an organization known for its trustworthiness or honesty, believes in climate change itself or is using it as an excuse to get resources from productive nations like the United States to fund its own personnel and agenda. If it believed in global warming, it could have held its climate conferences online. For example, virtual reality, Linden Labs, Second Life, or equivalent. Then they would have no travel-related carbon emissions at all, and also far less expenses. Well, from where we sit, the answer is that if they hold it online, the attendees can't eat virtual caviar wedges, which is what was served at the Copenhagen conference, and they can't visit Cancun, Mexico resorts and beaches, which is where they held the event in 2010. From where we sit, cap and trade and climate change is simply a modern incarnation of a centuries-old scam called selling indulgences. There were people in medieval times, and Geoffrey Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale at the very end has a very instructive poem about a man who went around selling indulgences for people's sins. They offered to get you out of a very conveniently invisible purgatory in exchange for money, of course, and Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale made that very clear. Now, we suspect that if these indulgence sellers really believed in God, someone who would possibly punish them in the afterlife for wrongdoing, they would have never dared to claim the ability to sell forgiveness for sins. And the behavior of the climate activists, maybe they don't really think there is climate change, because when they go to a conference like the one at Copenhagen, rent big limousines which produce a lot of carbon dioxide, fly in on private planes, well, maybe they don't believe in any real consequences either, so the question is, why should anybody else? There's a very useful Latin phrase called cui bono. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I've spelled it correctly, and it means who benefits, who gains from these cap and trade mandates and carbon taxes and so on. First, there's businesses that expect to profit from trading in carbon credits. For example, Lehman Brothers and Enron, both of which are out of business, had business plans to make a lot of money off of cap and trade. Neither of them, by the way, produced anything of real value to society. Also, there's renewable energy products that cannot otherwise justify themselves under an engineering economic analysis, something called net present value analysis, simply because they are not sufficiently cost effective. That's why they need government support, government mandates to make them work. Then there are the people in the United Nations associated with the United Nations, and also non-profit Save the Environment groups that really don't produce anything of value to society, but they like to travel on other people's money to places like Copenhagen, Cancun resort area, and dine on caviar wedges. Most of us wish we had jobs like that. In the real world, we don't. The next question, though, isn't energy independence worth it anyway? Well, we're going to see that that isn't really an honest argument either. The idea that cap and trade will result in energy independence is basically another sham for the special interests that plan to profit from it. If we really wanted energy independence, we wanted to tell the Middle East what it could do with its oil, all we have to do is dig, especially in places like Pennsylvania and West Virginia, because we have huge coal reserves in this country. Now, in the Second World War, when the Allies cut off Germany's oil supplies, the Germans proved that you can convert coal into motor vehicle fuels. Actually, I think the process dates back to before World War II, but the Germans were able to run their war machine on fuel from coal. Technologies that have been around for more than 70 years. We ought to be able to put it to work today. The process of converting coal to gasoline becomes competitive from what we've seen at no more than $50 per barrel oil, and the online reference says $30 to $40 a barrel. Oil is now above $90 a barrel, which means we ought to be doing this on a wholesale basis. We ought to have coal to gasoline plants running in every state that produces coal, so why aren't we doing it? Well, the reason we're not doing it is because the people who would benefit from cap and trade wouldn't make any money off of this, and also, of course, when we start converting coal into gasoline and cutting gasoline prices, cutting energy prices, it would show that their argument was bankrupt, and then they wouldn't be able to profiteer off of what, from where we sit, is a phony agenda. And that's why it's not happening. That's why we have presently gasoline above, I think, $3.50 a gallon, why we're still dependent on some very unstable countries for oil. It's because we are not doing what we ought to be doing and using our own abundant coal to produce motor vehicle fuels. We need to compare the behavior of these climate activists with the legendary honesty of King Canute, who went out of his way to demonstrate to his subjects that even his royal command could not stop the tide from coming in. There's plenty of people in Congress, other positions of authority, which they are, quite frankly, they don't belong there, want us to believe that action by Congress can prevent climate change, even though the world has gone through extremely warm periods. The plain states of the United States were actually underwater. Extremely cold periods. Glaciers came as far south as New York and Pennsylvania, where they formed the Pocono Mountains. But these people want us to believe that if we send trillions of dollars their way, they can actually prevent the world's climate from doing whatever it feels like doing. Okay, there's also a lot of talk about social responsibility. From where we sit, the purchase of carbon offsets or cost-ineffective renewable energy for politically incorrect purposes is going to result in lower wages for employees, higher costs for customers, lower profits for investors who have entrusted an organization with their money. That's not social responsibility, that's social irresponsibility. The answer is basic good engineering. Just use energy costs and not carbon footprints as the key performance metric. That's especially because waste of energy from non-carbon sources is not even going to be visible to the carbon footprint. Okay, even if we haven't convinced you that climate change is a complete scam, what we have proposed yields a win-win outcome. That's because any action that reduces energy costs, waste of energy, in manufacture and transportation increases value for all stakeholders. That includes higher wages for your employees, lower costs for your customers, higher returns for the investors who have entrusted the management of the business with their money. And also, if the energy does come from fossil fuels, good engineering has the incidental effect of reducing the carbon emissions, so that's win-win all around. Our conclusion from Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court basically says that when medicine show proprietors, and perhaps Merlin as depicted in the story, was based on some of the traveling scammers such as the, I think, Duke of Bilgewater and the lost Dauphin of France who appeared in Huckleberry Finn, who Mark Twain may have met in his travels as a riverboat pilot, when that comes up against science, rational analysis, clearing all the politically correct hype out of the way, the truth comes through and the magic of folderol gets left behind. That's everything, and thank you for listening.